Hello, everyone. This is Eva Nolik-Smith with YogaUOnline, and I'm very excited to be here today with Yasmin Lambat, a yoga therapist and somatic movement educator who joins us from the United Kingdom. Yasmin is an innovative teacher with a deep knowledge of the fascia, the connective tissue of the body, and the role the fascia plays for our structural health and balance. And in her work, Yasmin focuses on helping people improve their physical and emotional well-being through movement therapies like yoga and somatic release and somatic movement. And one of the wonderful things about Yasmin's work is that she's found many innovative ways to work with the fascia to keep it healthy. Yasmin has developed her own approach to movement called body sensing, which incorporates approaches to foster more mindful movement and interoception, and also work with keeping the fascia and the connective tissue balanced and supple in the body, which is one of the things we'll be talking about today. So Yasmin, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us all the way from the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Ava. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. It's been a long time coming. So yes, I'm thrilled to be doing this with you.
And you are an expert in all things fascia, in all things relating to how the fascia affects the structure of the body. Mm-hmm. Looking more broadly, the fascia is part of the soft tissues, the muscles, the tendons, ligaments, and so on. And the soft tissues, and particularly the aging of the soft tissues, I find is a really fascinating topic that we don't hear as much about as we should. We hear what happens when the bones age. We get osteoporosis, and it creates all sorts of problems. But there really are a myriad of conditions that develop when people get older that also are linked to aging of the soft tissue. So we're talking about chronic pain issues, arthritis, tension, chronic tension areas, limited mobility, and so on. And, you know, we tend to look at them as limited conditions, like you go to the doctor and he says, oh, you got arthritis, or you got, you know, chronic back pain. But a lot of these conditions have, as I understand it, one common denominator, which is linked to aging of the soft tissues. Mm-hmm. Is that how you would look at it as well?
A little bit. And I must just go back in terms of being the expert. I think just to begin by saying that, you know, I'm very fortunate to have mentors like Robert Schleip, you know, Joanne Avison, John Sharkey. I see those, you know, Graham Scarr. I see those people as the experts. And for me to interpret what I'm learning from these mentors into movement. So that's the first thing. And it's been going on for many, many years. Tom Myers is another. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to aging, it's really interesting because, you know, there is this, our bodies do produce less hyaluronic acid, you know, hyaluron or hyaluronic acid or hyaluronan as it's known. I'll call it HA from now. It does decrease as we age, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the outcome of that is that we would experience arthritis or chronic pain.
You know, there is a certain amount of effort on avoiding osteoporosis. You know, we all know the importance of movement and strength building for keeping the bones strong. And certainly, you know, we're advised to take drugs for keeping the bones strong and avoiding fractures. But when it comes to aging of the soft tissue, there is a certain cascade of things that begin to happen when the soft tissues dry out. We get more stiff, we lose mobility, we may be more prone to certain conditions like back pain and arthritis. And it seems to me that where your work is unique is that you're saying, well, it doesn't have to be that way. That we can change, we can work with the soft tissues, we can work with the fascia. And of course, we all want to know, how do we work with the fascia? The fascia is so important. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about this process. What does it mean when we say the fascia dries out? Why does it cause problems? And how can we prevent that? How can we work with that in our movement practice?
Okay. Yeah, I can certainly go into that. And also, before we go there, you spoke about bone and osteoporosis. There's a really great study that's just come out recently on, bone as fascia, this bone that's alive, it's this tissue, how do we take supplements, or do we look at a different way of supporting our entire fascial fabric, including bone. So when we move, this hardness of the hardness of the bone, it does have some give, supports the fascial tissue around it. So I won't go into too much detail about that, but I'm going to come to this question around, how do we work with the soft tissue, and what does it mean when fascia is dehydrated? And let's go to, rather than kind of complete dehydration, it's tissue. We look at tissue hydration, and what does that mean? So there is a lot of interest and emphasis on the gel, the ground substance, the stuff that the fibers are bathed in, and the way that dehydration happens is when there's a change in the biochemistry of the tissue. And one of the causes of that change is, for example, sitting for long periods of time. If there's no movement in that area, you're creating some kind of physical stress on the body. I call it physical force or stress. And fascia will shape, or your biotensegrity structure will take the shape of whatever experience it's exposed to. So biotensegrity doesn't mean that we work fascia to reach this optimum biotensegrity structure. Biotensegrity refers to our design, and that our design is so adaptable to the minimum of change. So if we're not moving, or we're not mobile, that area where that's not moving, or if we're sitting for long periods of time at a desk, that strain of the fascial, of the soft tissue, has a biochemical reaction. It's not just a physical one. There's a biochemistry that happens. So the hyaluron becomes less efficient at absorbing the water around it. So hyaluron molecules are like a sponge, and when they're mobile, and they provide the gliding surface for our fascial fabric. And when there's any kind of strain, or when there's not enough mobility, the fibers get stuck and sticky, whether it's loose fiber or dense. And the dense tissue, of course, becomes stickier and stuck together, those collagen fibers. So any kind of strain or stress or discomfort that we feel, and if that pattern continues from month to month, then the hyaluron isn't working as efficiently as it can. So that's the first thing. So the way that I work is not just with the physical not moving, it's looking at the emotional side too, because our emotional state influences the health of the hyaluron. So it becomes sticky, we know that, with any kind of physical or emotional stress. So the way that I work with it is to look at the inner blueprints of the body, the inner blueprints of movement. And one of them is pandiculation. Pandiculation is that urge to stretch and yawn and unwind. The body has this innateness of, going into that yawn stretch response to regulate the nervous system, but also the movement allows for that fascial tissue to start to become, or the hyaluron to change its, change the chemistry of the gel. So when you trigger a parasympathetic response in the body, and it has to be a parasympathetic response that works with the natural regulatory system of the nervous system and not an induced parasympathetic state. I'll come to that in a moment. Pandiculation is a great way because it involves the diaphragm, it involves the psoas, it involves the vagus nerve. And when that trigger happens spontaneously, there's a shift in the entire fascial fabric. And that's how I start to explore that. So I've replaced stretch with expansion, and it's just the way we're designed. There's this inner expansion of the body. And so every movement that we go into has this expanding quality to it rather than the stretch. So it happens from the inside. So that's the first thing, is the inner blueprints of the body. Pandiculation is one of them. There's gentle rocking from side to side, you know, like a self-nurturing sensation. There's coaxing, pulsing, unwinding, myofascial unwinding. So it's exploring these, what I call sacred movements, these inner asana of the body that we're born with, to start to restore or rehydrate the fascial tissue. So that's the basis for my inner myofascial release or tissue hydration.
Yeah, very fascinating. And one of the things that Tom Myers often points out when he talks about this process of hydrating the fascia, he says it's not enough to drink water. Drinking a lot of water won't necessarily mean that the soft tissues get hydrated. So why is that, and what difference does movement make in terms of the mechanics of how the water gets to the soft tissues?
Okay, so Tom Myers also talked about squeezing the sponge.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and I'm going to come to water because there's been a change in hydration in terms of water. So since the last fascial congress in 2018. So drinking water is important before a therapy, but drinking water alone isn't going to hydrate fascial tissue. So drinking water before self-myofascial release or a manual therapy helps to hydrate the tissue. So how does tissue hydration work in terms of movement? So the gel or the interstitium, interstitium, however you pronounce it, is responsible for this exchange in biochemistry. So if, you know, it's involved in removing toxins from cells and replenishing nutrients within our body. So that's how it works. There's this kind of squeezing of the sponge action. If we don't nurture, and I go to the nervous system to a state where the tissue can rest and rehydrate, because rest is important, and we're constantly in this chronic stress or anxiety or if we're in that state, it doesn't allow the hyaluronic molecules to absorb the water surrounding it. So the same, for example, if we're exercising and we are over, or we're training every day and you don't get rest in between, you're not allowing your tissue to restore and become more resilient. So it's the same with this idea of squeezing the sponge. So the way that I describe it is this, that, you know, if you're not moving and you're sedentary, or if the interstitium isn't restoring, the environment isn't restoring enough, then you're going to get a buildup of cytokines within the interstitium. So it's important to understand that soothing, calming, releasing movements help to rehydrate the tissue. So not everyone works that way. I believe that that's the way to work with self-myofascial release or inner myofascial release, is to involve the nervous system in those movements. So for example, things like using props for myofascial release, whether it's, you know, little soft balls, they act as a calming effect on the fascial tissue. So it's a good thing. I mean, it is relevant, but remodeling of the tissue only happens through movement. So you want to have a combination of compression and movement for myofascial rehydration or tissue hydration. So to create that plumpness in the skin, and remember that we know that fascia is everywhere. You know, there's areolar tissue underneath the skin, but there's areolar tissue within our organs as well. So unwinding movements like squeezing the sponge and having that, and then the releasing effect of softening through the diaphragm creates this hydraulic sensation through the whole body, as if there's a self-massaging system within the body. And that's how I experience it. That's how I teach it. So to create this hydraulic sensation within the body. So it would include that auxetic nature of fascia. So auxetic tissues or auxetic materials become fatter, not thinner, when you pull them. So it's understanding these fascial properties that allow us to understand how to create movements that will hydrate the tissue and not just put strain on the tissue. So exercise is great. You know, you can exercise, you can run, you can, you know, do all of the things, and Ashtanga yoga, for example. But then when do you find that rest phase in between? When do you, you know, get the hydration back into the tissue?
Yeah, that's a beautiful point. And you also refer to your approach as inner or myofascial release or intuitive myofascial release. So clearly you have an interoceptive component where body awareness, our connection with the body, our sense of the sensations of the body play a big role as well.
Huge role, huge role. At the heart of the practice lies interoception. So if I were to look at three things for an intuitive practice, interoception or pratyahara would be the top one. Finding the quiet within. And from that quiet within, there are movements that arrive. And that's how it began for me. So listening to the inner sensation of the body, not even the outer sensation, but the inner sensation, because our design, or a biotensegrity design, is said to be multidimensional, not even three-dimensional. So bringing awareness to the inner core of the body and listening to the inner sensation, noticing whether there's any inner tension within the body, which is why I call it inner myofascial release, because we have the thoracic diaphragm, we have the thoracic outlet, you've got the pelvic diaphragm, and many more. You know, you've got the cranial diaphragm, but I focus on those three for inner myofascial release. And being able to tune in somatically and allow the body to self-adjust to release inner tension.
Right.
So it's the sacred core. It's the heart of the center where the diaphragm, psoas, and the heart merge. And of course, every other tissue within the body merges within that sacred core. So if you're beginning to find that softness within, it sends a sensation throughout the entire body. And then I kind of add intuitive movements.
Right.
Yeah, so I was talking about interoception, inspiration. I call them the three I's. Inspiration is finding the quiet within, and you know, this inspiration to rock begins to arrive spontaneously. There's also a figure of 8 that arrives. I call it the infinity movement. So that's one of the intuitive practices. And the third is to always find that inner ease, find what feels easy within the body. So the interoceptive signals are the quieter signals. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Great. And we're very excited because you have a course on YogaU on this topic about finding your inner myofascial release or intuitive myofascial release. So tell us about the course and what you're covering.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, so much has happened in the last 2 years since I did a YogaU course, and so much new stuff has emerged. So I'm going to be sharing all the new insights into fascia. For example, fascia sites are this new cell that Colasteco has found, and the significance of that is that it's shown to produce hyaluron. So the hyaluronic acid has taken front and center stage for well-being, if you like. So it's looking at how do soothing, calming movements based on the inner blueprints of our body, how do we initiate that for our well-being, not only for our physical well-being, for our emotional well-being as well. And another part of this course is to show everyone that you could have a prop-free approach to self-myofascial release. So I love props. I've used props. I love my soft balls, and it's still relevant. But sometimes when you're kind of, limited for time, or, you want to get people moving, then it's, I'm going to share some of the movements that I do in my session. And I just hope that it's something that people will connect with. Something else that arrives in that practice is how you can find inner asana. So you'll find, and this is what I found, when I started to go to that quiet within, and then you find these coaxing movements, you suddenly arrive in Gormukhasana and you don't even realize how you got there. So that's some of the things that I'll be sharing.
Yeah. I think it's a really beautiful point, because motivation is an issue for a lot of people. And usually when someone else tells us what to do, we tend to not practice to the same degree of adherence to what our body wants to do. And I think the wonderful thing about your approach is, if we do find that inner yoga, if we do that, find that intuitive impulse and move according to what the body wants to do, it's a very inherently soothing and satisfying practice that we want to do again and again. So that's another really important and wonderful aspect of it.
Yeah, and in fact, that is the core of it, Ava. I think, I mean, that is really the essence of it, because the self-practice has to be inspired rather than having to find motivation.
Right.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, Yasmin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
I think it's getting late over in the UK.
Yeah, the light's going down. It's beautiful. I mean, the seasons are amazing. So I'm very blessed and very grateful to be living right on the park. So yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, so great to connect with you, and we're very much looking forward to your course.
You too. Thank you. Namaste.
Bye-bye.